Wow, I feel powerful, totally. Thank you. That was awesome. I don't know how you felt in the audience. For me, I think it was a very hopeful film. There are huge problems that still face the area, but the existence of these plans and the fact that these plans and you, those of you who live in that part of the coast, this is a very eerie sound. Thank you. Are putting so much thought into this. I mean, the care, the consensus, the intelligence, the thoughtfulness is really impressive. I lived in that part of the coast when fishing was at its peak and logging was at its peak. There was money coming out of everybody's orifices, and it wasn't always a happy time. And it's great to see that this work is in progress. With that, I'd like to invite the panel up, please. Good to have you up at the front. Thank you very much. So I'd like to introduce the panel. We have Dallas Smith from Nanawakolas Council. Welcome, Dallas. Sabine Jessen. Nice to see you, Sabine. From Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, CPAWS. Anne Solomon. Hi, Anne. Last time I saw Anne, she was heavily pregnant. From Simon Fraser University. She's got a child somewhere here. Art Sterick at the end, Executive Director, Coastal First Nation. And Jim McIsaac, BC Fishing Caucus. I haven't met you, Jim, before, so very happy to have you all here. And so the format, we have an online audience, and so we may be getting some questions. Those in the online audience are welcome to send questions in as well. We're starting off. We only have 30 minutes for this, so it's got to be. I've got it. My job as a moderator is to keep it moving. I'll ask the first question to the whole panel, and then as members of the audience, real or virtual, ask questions. You can either direct them to the whole panel if you like, or to one panelist. Or you can let the panelists decide who wants to take it. That's what I usually do. So my question is a very simple one, and that is to each of you, and that is, what do you see the coast looking like in the next 20 years? You have 60 seconds each. I'll start with you, Art. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were warned about this one.
And thanks everybody for coming out tonight. As you can see, this is pretty critical work for the people that live in the Great Bear. What I see, and you've heard most of it, is I use the term back to the future. And I use that because in the mid-90s in Gitgat, which is where I'm from, in the Great Bear Rainforest, we had a project that was called Back to the Future, and we had a bunch of scientists from across Canada, from the East Coast, all kinds of different people that came in, and we basically studied where we'd been and hoped that perhaps we could get back there again. And this whole exercise has been part of that exercise. As we got into land use planning, we realized that we had to do marine use planning, that everything was all tied together. If you're dealing with ecosystems, they don't end at the water's edge. So the dream of Coastal First Nations is to get back to the future. And we think that there was enough equity, enough capital within the region to support an amazing economy that I arrived on 47 years ago. So much fish that you could literally almost walk on them. And that was almost every species. So I've seen the heyday, and I've seen it all decline, and we're now at the point where we're going to start to build that back up again. So that's what I see as the future.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thanks, Art. I guess I grew up on the coast. I grew up fishing on the coast, and so I've fished from the Bois de Fuca to the Alaska border and a lot of communities in between. And what I've seen on the coast, looking back, is a coast that's been disconnected from decision making from senior governments. And what I hope that the marine planning process here starts is to turn that around, and that in 20 years' time, we'll have a coast that the communities are connected to that decision making, that are integral to that decision making in the future, and that the resources that are on the doorstep of those communities are connected to those communities. So what Trevor talked about there about Haida Gwaii having $90 million worth of fish landed value around Haida Gwaii caught there and less than 2% landed there won't be happening in 20 years' time. That the communities that are on our coast are connected to those resources, and those resources provide for food security for those communities, and that we're doing this in an integrated way, that we're doing this in a very comprehensive ecosystem-based management way. And that's what I'd like to see in the future for this coast.
Okay, so in 20 years, my son Sam will be 20 years old. So I wrote him a 60-second letter. This is to Sam. Okay, so what I see and what I hope for on our coast in 20 years, Sam. First Nations constitutional rights will be upheld such that they have access rights, responsibilities, and authority in decision making. Commercial fisheries will yield high landed value because catches are strategically kept low and prepared locally for high-end markets, local ones. Catches are managed through community-based cooperatives where fishers actively participate in the design and management of policies, and wealth is equitably spread amongst participants. Conservation. Our wealth of coastal biodiversity and ecosystem processes that maintain it will be conserved through a diversity of management policies that balance the needs of people and nature, including protected areas, community-supported fisheries, territorial user rights for fishing, eco-certification, and ecosystem-based fisheries management plans. A federal moratorium on oil sands expansion will have precluded any need for a new pipeline to our coasts, simultaneously reducing the risk of oil spills locally, shrinking the impact of ocean acidification, increasing ocean temperatures and sea level rise globally, and securing the livelihoods and improving the quality of life for coastal communities in BC. And finally, Sam, science, both Western science and local knowledge and traditional knowledge will be upheld by our government and is the basis for informed decision making.
Thank you.
That was 60 seconds. I timed it on the way over. I did. I timed it.
And do save that letter, Anne. I wanted to see what Sam says.
Well, Anne, you've covered it all. I guess for me, reflecting back on the process as a stakeholder on the Haida Gwaii planning process, and while I'm there as an NGO and really trying to ensure that part of what the plans address is conservation and protection of some of those really incredible ecological areas on the North Coast. The other part that really comes through being there in the process, being there with the community and listening to what other stakeholders are saying, and I think others have covered this issue, and you certainly heard a lot about it in the film, is that strengthening of the coastal communities, because our communities on the North Coast are struggling. And what you heard so eloquently in that film is the importance for them of maintaining that connection with the ocean environment and having that ocean continue to support the communities, but in a way that also ensures the long-term health of the marine ecosystem. So I think for me, bringing those elements together and seeing that happen and seeing those riches of the marine ecosystems rebound to those levels of the Back to the Future that Art mentioned, I think that's really what my hope and dream for the region is.
Thanks, Sabine.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam people. Just something we always do. But in 20 years, I know we're going to be implementing these plans. I guess my question is whether it's going to be court-ordered or whether it's going to be done through meaningful collaboration. I think the nations of the coast have built a partnership over the years that has required the attention of government, and we're slowly getting the attention of the federal government so we can sit down and have these dialogues. That's why it was so important to get this plan done, so hopefully 20 years from now we're not implementing it. I look back to the terrestrial side side of this equation, and we're just now starting to implement the stuff we announced in 2007. So I hope we've learned from the ups and downs of collaboration, and within 20 years, we're well on a successful pathway towards implementation, court-ordered or not.
Oh, you can hang it on to it at the table. Thanks, Dallas. That's awesome. Thank you very much. You all did an amazing job sticking to your time. I wouldn't have done so well, I must admit. I guess, do we have any questions from the audience? Is there any online? Because I have another question that I'm dying to ask. But okay, I'll start off. That means I get another one. And I guess anyone in the panel would be welcome to answer this. One of the things that came across in the film for me was this recognition of the value of sustainability and employment, of sustainable jobs, not the kinds of rapid turnover jobs that have characterized a lot of the BC economy, really, generally in the past, and that part of the coast. So I guess I'm curious about how, through the MAP process, this notion of employment stability was addressed, and if you feel that there are still sort of loose ends hanging.
Sure. I think the fact that we were able to get everybody at the table who wanted to be there. I look back again to the terrestrial side where most of the same actors and characters got to know each other. There's a real effort to keep the right people in and the wrong people out, if you will, or vice versa, depending on whether we're working with the NDP or the Liberals. But I think through the MAP planning, we learned from that, and that inclusiveness is important for our plans to be able to, forgive the pun, hold water, if you will. We need to have everybody's at least acknowledgement that there's a group effort there, that everybody is making that concession to try to find what that positive tomorrow is. And again, that's from lessons that we've learned through the terrestrial side.
Great.
I'll add just another thought to that. I think it's not only occupational stability, but occupational diversity. And I think, Art, you said it well in the film where you talked about the whole problem with occupational monocultures, I think you called them, and I really agree. And I think part of the people at the table were very much thinking about the diversity of occupations and the ability of people to be able to switch between occupations to cope with any kind of dramatic change, whether it's changes in international markets or what have you, climate change, and that diversity gives us some resilience to those kinds of shocks to the system.
It's a great question. I mean, the issue about balancing ecosystem on one side and socioeconomics on the other side, and doing that so that what we do in that socioeconomic system doesn't ruin the ecosystem that we all depend on, and that's a huge challenge. And it's not something that the plans, as they are written, have all the solutions to. I think the solutions moving forward is that collaboration that Dallas talked about. And that's working together to look at the issues, gaining more understanding of what's going on, both in the ecological systems, the natural systems, and our social-economic systems, and bringing that together with as much diversity as we can to make the strongest decisions we can moving forward. That's what I say.
Yeah, I think what a lot of us have forgotten is what capitalism is. What is it really? Where does it come from? Where does the word come from? And what we know in the Great Bear is that it's the natural capital that exists within a region. And as First Nations, we've always known that. We have always fished only the abundance, but not jeopardizing the stocks that were within a particular region. We did that with salmon. We've done that with halibut. We do that with cod. If we're fishing in a halibut ground and we find that things begin to decline there, we go and find another one that has more abundance there. We don't fish it out. And we've done that throughout the Great Bear for millennia. We ourselves got caught up in the industrialization of the fisheries that were in the region. I was a commercial fisherman. I fished halibut. I had my own license. I fished salmon. The one year, I remember one year I caught over 7,000 salmon. I was a gill netter. I was on a boat by myself. This is not on a seine boat. So I was just as responsible. We all kind of bought in to this capitalist system, that the industrialization of capital, which really sucked the natural capital out of the region. But we thought we caught it on time, but we ended up in a major struggle with industry having control over government, which we learned in this exercise. We went to Canada shortly after we started land use planning in about 2002, and we convinced them to get engaged with marine use planning with us. That ended up being the PNSEMA process, and they were glad to do it. They had the Ocean Act that said that they should do it, and all kinds of other things. So it was the right thing to do. They came out and we defined the region, and it was Dallas and his colleagues' territory, his tribes, all the way to the BC-Alaska border. And along come an oil pipeline trying to come into the region. Mm-hmm. And they looked at what we were doing as jeopardizing their industrial economy, their access, as you heard the person from the port in Prince Rupert. They're locked in oil in Alberta. And they lobbied, and we actually have records of Enbridge in 1 year lobbied the federal government 30 times and specifically asked them to get out of marine use planning because it was going to disrupt what they were doing. And so that's why we carried on, and we carried on with the provincial government because we had developed such a good relationship on the terrestrial side. Well, that's why this is going to carry on. That's why this is going to be implemented. What's happened in the meantime is there's been more and more court cases. There's been over 200 court cases that have said that First Nations have a right to an economy, whether it's to herring or salmon or halibut. We have the right to our land and we have the right to our water. These are rights that are entrenched in the Constitution of Canada, and they've been reinforced by the Supreme Court. And as Dallas says, if the federal government has not learned anything by trying to jam Enbridge down our throats, they've lost that battle, by the way. If they haven't learned anything on that, then we will teach them again on this exercise, because it's not an option for First Nations not to implement the plans that we have developed with all of the other stakeholders, with the environmental community, with the scientific community, with the fishermen that are in the region, and all the other people that live there. So that's why we've done it the way we've done it. We've made sure that we've included everybody in the room, and we're going to implement this. There's just no doubt about that. It's not an option. Mm-hmm.
Yes, go ahead.
Whoever on the panel wants to speak, but I just wondered what you see the most urgent needs are in the short to medium term on getting implementation up to a level that we start to see tangible action on the plans.
So the question, sorry, just for the online audience, is what are the, short-term, most urgent needs, right? For getting implementation of the parts of this plan.
I think buy-in by the federal government and or industry, it doesn't have to happen at the same time. I think the forest industry has learned a lot of hard lessons through collaboration and what it takes to actually have the social license to even be able to have the audacity to ask some of the questions that they're asking. And at the end of the day, this plan is going to be the foundation of where we can start those dialogues. And so one or the other eventually has to buy in, and they have to bring their checkbook. It's not, you can let us do the heavy lifting and buy in for free. You got to come and you got to become prepared to engage us at a meaningful level.
I think I would echo that when it comes even simply looking at the protection management zones and getting a network of marine protected areas implemented from those plans. That really can't be done without bringing the federal government to the table. So that is a really key element.
Agreed.
So, I will also agree. I would say the governance is central in this whole thing. And what I see right now, you look at fisheries and the relationship of the federal government with First Nations on our coast around fisheries. Yes, First Nations have won a pile of court cases on rights and titles. Right now, there's a justification trial going on with the federal government and the Nuu-Chah-Nulth. where the federal government is trying to justify the infringement on First Nations rights and title. Until we get out of that kind of mindset of taking this back and forth to court and try to work collaboratively, we're in a mess. And we have to get out of that. And we have to start working and building those collaborative governance mechanisms so we can get on. That's the key.
One of the things we learned many, many years ago is that, you can come into an area, you can protect an area, and all the folks who are engaged in that generally go away. The environmental community used to come in and protect a valley, and then they would move on to the next valley and leave the First Nations there to try and make some kind of sense out of what had happened. When we did the Great Bear Rainforest and the terrestrial plan, we made sure that we put the capacity in the room to implement. We created an endowment of $60 million. $60 million that came from a lot of philanthropic organizations in Canada and the US, and an additional $60 million to help jumpstart the economy in the region. We're going to require something similar on the marine side. But we've taken steps there. We're already heading down that road. We don't trust the federal government. We never have. When we began PNSEMA, when we began to do marine use planning with the federal government, they funded it. They were putting in over $1 million a year. I was underneath the Golden Gate Bridge at what they call the Presidio. It's a fort, and the Moore Foundation was located there. Gordon and Betty Moore, the founders of Intel, and I made a presentation about the Great Bear Rainforest. And the head of the organization came up to me after and said, "We've got a problem here. We have a bunch of investments out there that have come in better than they ever had before, and we're thinking of getting into the marine side." And we said, "Well, have we ever got a project for you?" Because currently we're funded in marine use planning by the federal government, but we know they're going to leave. It's the way the federal government operates. They always start a program, and then they pull it back a little bit and control what you do. As First Nations, we've learned this over a long, long period of time. So we knew they were leaving. We challenged the Moore Foundation to replace them as they left, and they did. Not only did they replace them, they actually funded them. They funded the federal government to stay in for a while. They funded the provincial government to stay in. They have put in tens of millions of dollars in this effort just to do the plan. They have not told us what to do in the plan, as some might suggest. We're the ones that are doing the plan, the people that live in the region, but they have basically given us the capacity to do the plan, and they have pledged to put money in if we can match it, and we're doing that. Coastal First Nations and the Nanwakolas have programs that we are putting in to match the money that is going to be coming in from the Moore Foundation to begin the implementation of these MAP plans. So we have capacity. If the federal government wants to come along with us, they're more than welcome. As a matter of fact, we're urging them to do it because we are going to implement this. We have the capacity, we have the smarts, and as you saw in the video, we have the people on the land and in the water who are capable of doing this. They have the smarts, they have the capacity, they have the infrastructure. It will all be done. So that's where we are right now.
I might just add something to that, Lance, and say to all of you who are here tonight and to people watching who care about that area, I mean, we need your help as well to keep the government's feet to the fire and make sure that those plans are implemented. Because without all of you watching and letting governments know that this is important to you, it also won't happen. First Nations need your support, and the governments need to know that people are watching and expecting that these plans will be implemented and that things are going to change on the North Coast.
Thank you. Yeah, I think personally that the federal government's pursuit of this issue, creating a conspiracy theory around foreign funding of the environmental movement in Canada, was a disgrace. As a Canadian, I'm ashamed. And that I certainly agree that has to change. Are there other questions?
Just a comment to that
Sure.
end for what Sabina was makes sense that if we're going to engage a broader swath of people to try and at least get a little bit of an ocean swell happening around this. And it's a challenge, right? Because it's the ocean and it looks like a bunch of water and people go on and they don't get engaged. And if we want them to engage with their federal people who are running for parliament, it would be wonderful. And maybe it's happened on this website with the group that's made this great film, is that there's some information, very specific, not overwhelming, that people can do to take action. And I think if that's available, that's great. And I know that lots of organizations do that on their websites, but at the end of the film, if they go to your site, if there's some very specific information that can be provided that people can write or do, then it empowers a few more people anyway to put their voice into the forum. It may not sound like a lot, but you know, I did work for government for a bit, and I know when you get a letter or something, you have to deal with that letter. So that matters. And MPs and MLAs do look at that stuff. So anything that can be done collaboratively from whatever organizations we have, if we can have some consistent messaging, that would be important. And there's some very specific messaging that I heard up here that needs to happen for the federal election.
Thank you very much. I think that's, I won't try to, sorry, online audience, I'm not going to try to repeat that, but that was a very helpful comment, and I appreciate it. Are there other questions for the panelists, I guess?
So just carrying on, what do you see for the future of this film? Are you going to, I mean, we saw it tonight. Are you going to try and increase the size of the audience? Get it out?
So the question was, what do you see for this question I think goes to you, Karen. What do you see for the future of the film? Are you going to increase the size of the audience, or how will you get it?
Yeah, so we started off in Haida Gwaii 3 weeks ago with screenings and went back to all the places where we filmed for the folks there. We make the film available for free for anyone who wants to use it, to share it with their community, with their friends, with their colleagues, with their networks. So you can go to our website, theocean-frontiers.org, and contact us and let us know what you want to do, and we'll send you the materials to do it. So when you leave here, there's a postcard that you can pick up that has the website and our Facebook page, so that you can stay in contact with us that way. The film will go on to be used in schools. We did a number of school screenings on our tour over the last 3 weeks, and it's phenomenal. The kids love seeing this. They like, you know, you become alive when you see your place, your home, on the big screen, and you see young people, young leaders, who are doing a tremendous job. So let's see, schools, community screenings are some of the key ways that we have gotten our films out. We've worked with over 850 partners with the Ocean Frontiers series and screened the film in the States, in 34 states. Some 40 countries around the world have shown our films. I see the same thing happening with this film, because there's tremendous interest in turning things around in how we manage our oceans. And yeah, it may not be the sexiest topic, but it's super, super important. And it doesn't take all of us to make a difference. It takes a number of us to make a difference. So be sure to pick up a postcard on your way out, and you can also note on your survey, leave your email address as clearly legible as possible, please. And we will be keeping folks up to date as news becomes available on the marine planning. Another good website to go to is the mapocean.org. That's MAPP ocean.org, and that's all of the plans are there, and all of the information about the marine planning sits on that website.
Thank you, Karen. Other questions? Yes, go ahead, please.
On a film a little further south?
The question is, are you working on a film a little further south as well, presumably?
No, but is the marine planning going to go to the south coast? Is there going to be another marine planning effort?
I know we've been in some preliminary discussions with our brothers from the Squamish Nation about
Yes.
their interest in marine partnership planning and those sorts of issues. So I'll note that some of the work that we've done on the Great Bear Rainforest on the terrestrial side, between Art Sterrett and myself, we negotiated the first what's called Strategic Engagement Agreement. There's now 25 different groups and nations in the province that have signed those agreements. So I think you'll see the lessons that we've all learned and liked together, you'll see them not cookie cuttered, but you'll see them learned amongst other people.
Thank you.
I think the province does need to hear that we need to do marine planning in the Strait of Georgia. I think it's urgent, and if you support that, you should let them know that too.
Thank you, Sabine. I agree. Thank you. We have time for Jonathan has ruled one more question. Yes, please go ahead.
I think it's obvious what the current federal government's attitude is to your plan. What are the other federal political parties? What sort of noises are they making about your plan?
So the question is, it's obvious what the federal government's position is on the plan. The question is, where do the other political parties stand with respect to this process?
Yeah, I had the opportunity about this time last spring to take Justin Trudeau down into the Great Bear Rainforest. So he knows all about this. His right-hand man, his campaign manager, was the head of the World Wildlife Fund. And when the World Wildlife Fund was promoting marine use planning. So the Liberals are strongly in support of the plan, and if they're elected, they will do it. We have an MLA up in our area who is strong on it, Nathan Cullen, who's kind of like, the number 2 guy in the NDP, and we know for sure that they will implement it. But guess what? The federal government that we have right now is also going to implement it. And I'm not saying that you necessarily vote for them because they're going to do that, but they have actually been tinkling around the edge. Like they have agreed to do a pilot project with the Haida and with the Coastal First Nations on reconciling some of our differences in the ocean. And that's what we're talking about. They're kind of nibbling at the edges, and they're moving down that road. I want to tell you a little story. It goes back, and it was something that Jim mentioned in his presentation here. Back in the early '90s, I was at a dinner table in Hartley Bay, and my father-in-law, who was the president of the Native Brotherhood, was having turkey dinner with us in the spring, and he was on his way to Geneva to work on negotiating the Law of the Sea. He was one of the negotiators in the Law of the Sea for Canada. And so that, I've been indoctrinated in terms of what that meant and how we had to do that. That was the plan for Canada, to protect what they had, and underneath that is all this other stuff. One of the things that my father-in-law did at that time, and I'm going to share this with you as well, is he sang a song in Geneva to all of the delegates from around the world as they came to an agreement on what the Law of the Sea contract looked like. And I'm gonna sing that for you, but I'm gonna ask you to provide me a bit of a drum beat, because I didn't bring my drum. So I want you to maybe tap on your leg or something, but hey, 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 good looking. What you got cooking? When my father-in-law came back from the Law of the Sea, all of the newspapers across Canada and the U.S. Had as the headline, BC Chief has the last laugh on the Law of the Sea conference. That was in the newspapers. So.
Now, on a more serious note, I grew up in the fishing industry, and one of the groups that I worked with and was part of was the Fishermen's Union. I was also part of the Native Brotherhood on the coast as well. And when I was a youngster attending one of their conventions, they talked about the UN Law of the Sea and the development of the UN Law of the Sea, and how they had been part of that development and wanting to protect the access of coastal communities and local fishermen to the adjacent waters around our coast and for coastal people around the planet to have that access. The seas of the planet, there's a doctrine called the freedom of the seas, which says the seas are basically owned by none. They're not the sovereignty of any nation. And the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea really, it granted nations or states around the planet exclusive economic jurisdiction around their coast, but it didn't grant them the exclusive access to stop boats from coming in or out or anything like that. The seas are looked upon as a heritage of all mankind and of all the species that are on this planet. And the fishing community here was part of that, going out and fighting to ensure that we had that access. So, and the federal government took that. If you go back and look at our House of Commons and the discussion around it, it was, the basis of their support for that was to protect the access of coastal communities and local fishermen for that exclusive economic zone. They've lost their way somewhere along the way. What's happened on our coast is an example of that. Atlantic coast is a little different.
Thank you.
One other point on that issue of governments of the day, we don't have to look far back to remember when Gordon Campbell was challenging the Nisga'a Treaty, and he left to London as the chief of BC. So it's not unfounded that government's going to get it, but we're prepared to help get them to understand it a little bit quicker at the end of the day. So it's not going to change. Our people are going to sing our songs, dance our dances. We're not afraid of them taking our culture and our identity from us anymore. So we're prepared to take these tools and use them to implement these issues. But like we've said, all of us have said throughout the movie, it's going to take some leadership from the federal government, whichever color stripe that they wear the day. But I just have to go back to that Gordon Campbell remark when we all remember how he was fighting the Nisga'a Treaty and he got it. Unfortunately, he got chased out for getting it maybe a little bit, but that'll be for other people to tell.
Any other comments on that? We good? Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panelists. Thank you so much for coming up. I'd like to thank Karen for coming and screening the film, and it's a wonderful thing that you've done. And I'd like to thank the audience for coming and being such a positive audience. Thank you very much. The gallery will be open outside for the next half hour or so. The bar is open. You're very welcome to stay and mingle and ask more questions. So on behalf of the Aquarium and the board of the Aquarium, I'd like to thank all of you once again. And good night, online audience.